Tonight, we discuss the crisis in education, the crisis in the classroom, and we'll talk about the current issues that are going on in the world of politics. Welcome to Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your host. Donald Eason is the president of CURE. Sito Narcisse is with the Apple Consulting Group. Pam Good joins us again, the founding president of Beyond Basics. And Dr. Marco Clark is the CEO of the Richard Wright Public Charter School for Journalism and Media Art. Let me start with you, Dr. Clark. How do we get back to critical literacy and thinking skills in the classroom?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. We get back to critical skills in the classroom by getting back to basics. I think what we've missed is that we had this guideline that kids needed to know certain things by kindergarten, and we've missed that mark now. We've depended too much on education in the system, and we have not leaned back on the parents' responsibility of getting kids ready. And so that has had a long-standing challenge throughout the K-12 system. And we're seeing all the backlash as our students are graduating and moving on to institutions of higher learning. And so it takes place with learning the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s by 3 years old and getting moving.
You know, it's good. You know, language shapes our understanding of the world. And what we find is that oftentimes teachers just don't have the necessary skills to teach that to kids in the classroom. How do we change that dynamic?
Well, I think we start embracing a program that teaches kids how to read. In the early 80s, the universities embraced a whole language approach, and we've known for well over a decade that does not teach kids how to read. And it is phonics, it's decoding, and we find that once kids have missed it and they're in middle and high school, they really need one-on-one tutoring along with that. But in an average of 6 weeks, we get grade level movement. So there is a solution to this crisis. We just have to roll up our sleeves and get going.
You know, obviously, everything, Mr. Eason, starts in the classroom, and it starts with the parents. And it's obvious when parents are educated, it's reflected of their kids in the classroom. And when they're not, it's also impacted in the classroom. How do we better prepare parents to reinforce what is being taught in the classroom, not just in terms of the education, but the behavior, the respect, the discipline that is necessary to have a thriving classroom where everybody learns?
Well, I think it actually starts with the parents. You know, the Bible says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from. And it doesn't even say send them to the public school or send them to the preacher. It says parents. So if we want to give the parents the responsibility that they have of raising their children. I'll use Ben Carson's example. His mother wasn't educated. I think she had an 8th grade education, maybe even lower, 3rd grade, somewhere in there. But he became a great physician because his mother was involved in his education. And part of that is understanding the public schools' place in our lives. They're actually partnering with the parents. There was a movie out, Whose Children Are They? The public school system doesn't own the children. The children actually own themselves from a natural standpoint, but the parents are given the responsibility to raise the children, and the public school is to partner with them. I think part of the problem is the administrative state in the public school system. It has risen from between 2000 and 2019. The administrative state has grown 87.6%. while the number of students has only grown 7.6%, and the number of teachers has only grown 8.7%. Why is administrative state so big unless they're trying to take over the ownership of the children? Really, it goes back to the parents first, and then working with the parents. It used to be that parents had a big role in working with schools, and now they're kind of trying to kick the parents out.
Let me stay with you. And what do you find, if you had to use a blueprint in your experiences, what is it that parents do that has nothing to do with money or the resources, but what they do with their children every day in that home that gives them the best chance for having a quality education?
You know, that's a really good question. A part of it is the difficulty is you need a two-parent home has shown to be more successful than a one-parent home. But if you look at it from, I'll give you a concrete example. I have a daughter, she was in the 8th grade, and she had a paper due, and she didn't do it, and I found out about it, and I said, why didn't you do your paper? And she said, because the teacher doesn't care. I said, well, I care. And I went and had a conversation with the teacher and asked him if he would be kind enough to allow her the extended time to get this paper done, because I want to see her get it done. And he was kind enough to extend her that grace. But you can see my involvement as a parent is what caused her to be able to thrive in the school system. If I would have just left it and said, well, the schools will take care of her, of course, she would have done that paper, and I'm sure there have been many others that would have come after. She wouldn't have done those either.
You know, let me get Mr. Narcisse involved in the conversation. How do we do a better job with teacher preparation and effectiveness, Mr. Narcisse? We have to improve the teacher training and preparation. We have to have them prepared for what they're going to face in the classroom, because it's unlike with our generation. When we were growing up, the classroom is totally different now. How do you prepare teachers for that classroom?
Yeah, I mean, well, the main thing is that, you know, you have to have continuous training for them. The generations change, technology has changed, a lot of things have gone on, and the reality is, right now, when you look at our current teaching population force, it's a generational difference between the children that are coming out and what they're exposed to versus what old school teaching is. And so I think you have to have a combination of that. The way that you try to work through that is to really continue to have continuous professional development, working with new ideas, helping them to understand the dynamics between parents, students, and also the new content that comes out of curriculum. And as you can also see even now, that's even has changed because technology has now been even more of a driver with AI on future workforce job readiness. And that's why we try to work a lot with trying to help teachers to understand those different sets of dynamics at SJ.
What about this good, the kids understanding the importance of reading and writing? Because with the internet now, their definition of reading and writing is quite different from our definition. Because, you know, I'm not one to do the Kindle and read books online. I like to get the hard book. I'm the kind of guy that like to have the Baltimore Sun on my desk, that I can pull the newspaper out to read, or the New York Times. I like to read. I like to read books, the classics, deep reading. That's not encouraged anymore, because, you know, it allows you to travel and experience cultures and things that would just amaze you.
Well, what I would have to say about that is that we all have relied on education to teach our kids how to read. And we roll out year after year a beautiful curriculum that students just cannot access. They can't read those classics. They can't even read street signs. And, you know,
Can't
from the
read?
parents.
Are you saying they're illiterate?
I'm saying they're illiterate.
Really?
I'm saying they are illiterate. There are high school students attending school right now that are reading at a 2nd grade level. This needs to be fixed. Education's broken. Detroit, we've been working in Detroit public schools for 25 years. The parents are relying, they get their kids to school. They're almost 50% illiteracy with parents in Detroit. They take their kids to school and they don't learn to read, and that's gone on for decades.
So what's happening in the classroom they're not learning?
What's happened in the classroom is they started rolling out a whole language approach in the early 80s, and we have generations of kids that have aged out of that. I believe that, well, I know this has been a silent epidemic, but I believe it's connected to almost every social ill we have in America. We have 85% of people incarcerated that can't read. We have to address this. This is a national crisis. There are 65% of the kids in our nation in schools that are not able to read proficiently at the 8th grade.
So let me challenge you. So let's forget about the 65% for a moment. Why is it that the 35% are? able to read and thrive?
I think it's because they have parents who could read and they noticed their kids couldn't read, and in some cases, they paid tutors exorbitant amount of monies to teach them. Some of those parents have even found us over the years, and we help because there's a rise of illiteracy, not just in vulnerable communities, but in every district right now. In the in the wealthiest districts, you have 25 to 30% of the kids that can't read. You have an increase of ADHD, dyslexia, autism, English language learners. The universities have not taught teachers how to teach kids to read for decades, and that needs to be changed. We have 40 states right now that are mandating they're calling it a science of reading approach, but it is phonics and decoding, and they're mandating that the universities teach and that they find ways to teach phonics.
Let me interrupt you a minute. So you're saying that a kid, I know we've heard this, get to his senior year and they're illiterate. Where does this begin? When the child leaves the home? Is it first grade? Isn't it that, are you saying that the school cannot pick up on the fact that this kid has a problem and you give this kid more attention? Where does it start?
I think I'm sorry.
It used to be, the idea is from kindergarten to third grade, we learn how to read. And then from fourth grade on, we read to learn. So it's somewhere between kindergarten and third grade, they're not getting the basics. And it's hard to catch up if you don't get it in the beginning. Because I can remember, and I'm sure we all remember, when we were in third grade. As a matter of fact, when you got to the fourth grade, that's when they started separating students. If you read better than some other students, they put you in a higher level of book to read. But today, because they got away from phonics, phonics was really the building block for education, and the educational system is going to the whole language learning.
But why would you take phonics away? I have a lot of respect for phonics. I learned with phonics. Why would you take something away that worked?
That's a good question. There's actually a lawsuit around. There's many lawsuits around that, but there are a couple of people suing Columbia University and the founders of the whole language approach. It was introduced about a month ago in Massachusetts. And so why did they do that, and why are they still upholding that works when, to your point, Don, education, you got kids reading by third grade, and then they continued to improve. And they stopped doing that, and we have kids that stay. There's no reading class for them. High school kids are reading somewhere.
Are the kids mature enough to realize that they have a problem before they reach fourth grade?
They are, well, before they reach fourth grade, maybe not, but I believe so.
Are their parents able to recognize it?
If they're paying attention. And
listen, not only do we read, our parents read to us, but we have to read to our parents.
Absolutely.
That would have been detected early on. We're going to take a break here and come back on this town hall, Your Voice, Your Future. We'll be back. Dr. Clark, before we pivot to another aspect of education that we want to discuss, we've said a lot here, and I want to have a discussion among ourselves to have you comment on what you're hearing. And it seems as though if these kids are illiterate, and it seems to be overwhelmingly, what is happening now, they're dumbing down the curriculum, not raising the standards, but dumbing it down to accommodate them, which is another crisis.
I think in many instances, what the schools are trying to do is to adapt to the students that we're serving. And that is a big mistake. Part of the reason is that, again, as we've talked about the parents, the ownership of why it's important to read. I think we're in a cell phone technological age of which folks are so dependent on that. And if I can Google whatever I need, and if a child can regurgitate what's being put in place by Siri, then some parents are accepting that as a clear understanding, and they're not doing a real deep dive into that. And what we're seeing with our teachers is something that we're also not really looking at, is the fact that the state assessments has been such a big deal for teachers that they're like overshot about the production and not really being able to look at mastery of learning. And that is causing a deeper dive, or a deeper divide, I should say, in the literacy gap. And so more students are becoming more illiterate, and those numbers are rising because that part is not being able to be accomplished inside of the academy.
Mr. Narcisse?
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Doc said. The reality is, you know, sometimes the focus is more on state assessments than it is on mastery and competency, you know, how you can perform on the test. And, you know, as you know, that one test is not always a determinant of everything, but schools are evaluated in that space on whether you're good, not good. And so the other thing, too, I wanted to bring up, because, you know, this was common in the last segment, was, you know, the schools are dependent on to do a lot of things. And the reality is they can't do everything. It has to be a much more whole child community approach, even with reading, right? So when you look at kids who really perform well with literacy and those things, they're getting reading all over the place. Whether they go home, they walk in their community, they go to church, or wherever they are, they're getting that space. You know, there's a dynamic right now between disengagement of kids, not only in schools, but also in the type of communities that they're coming from. And so there's a whole lot of dynamics that play on why they're not unable to do certain things. And technology has actually changed those dynamics, right? So you heard the example that Doc talked about with, you know, now you can just ask Siri a question. Well, now you can just ask ChatGPT or any of those things. I mean, kids are way more versed into those spaces than they are in everything. That's why now we have to teach teachers a totally different way on how to actually engage children in their learning. And kids, you know, they're going to learn differently. If you remember when the TI-83 came out, which was a calculator, people said, well, the kids are not going to learn math because it went from a Casio to TI-83 in college. Well, they're not going to do the mathematics. Well, it's the same type of dynamic that's going on today where, you know, you have to change that. I mean, when I was a teacher, I saw the same dynamics back then in the early 2000s. You see the same thing being a school leader in superintendents or who are running districts, working with state superintendents, are trying to manage those dynamics with all the pressures of accountability and assessments.
So are we now saying that education is centered around now empowering marginalized students?
I don't mean to chuckle on that, but yeah, that's exactly what's going on. It's a situation where I think it's greater than that. And John Dewey, one of the great, I guess you can call him great, but his idea of education, he wanted children to go to school not so much to learn math and English and science, but he wanted it to use it as a place for socializing. And I think that's what our schools are turning into. It's more of a place for socializing than it is a place for learning.
It's because they haven't taught them to read. I mean,
Who's they?
We are.
Who's they?
The leadership of education in America has not taught the kids how to read. And I will tell you that we compete in a world stage now, not just this nation, and other countries. They've supported our work here, and they are dumbfounded because they say, I can't believe your kids can't read. We teach our kids how to read and write in German, and we also teach them how to read and write in English. So you have other countries around the world teaching our language and theirs. This has been a silent epidemic for way too long.
But they're conditioned for it. They're conditioned to learn. They're conditioned for more language. They're conditioned to read.
But we have to give our kids an opportunity, though.
But it's
teach them to read.
We're talking about expectations here, though. When you dumb down expectations, this is exactly what you get.
That is the key. The expectations have been lowered.
Well, because they've taken away their ability to learn in the classroom. I will tell you something good.
Who's taken away the ability to learn in the classroom?
They have not given the teachers the tools.
Let's go back to the
Board of Education
We've mentioned
and the Department of Education. May I say just one good news about this? We can triage this problem and in 5 years look back on it in America. We can do that, and I can talk about that more if you'd like.
So let me go to Dr. Clark, because you keep mentioning the Department of Education here, and everyone knows that the White House has proposed shutting down the Department of Education, and it sounds like it needs to be shut down.
It does.
It does. Mm-hmm. Dr. Marco, well, let me catch my breath here. Dr. Marco, let me start with you. It needs to be shut down. Why?
Well, there's some ups and downs thoughts about that as to whether or not the Department of Education needs to be shut down in total. I think there are some concerns that educators are having around, funding, around special supports for students with special needs, students that have ADHD and emotional disturbance issues. And so there are some concerns around whether or not that's going to be able to be funneled into school. There are some things I think within the Department of Education that really needs to be worked on, such as, we're talking about state assessments, the accountability framework, and not allowing students to holistically be able to learn with a mastery of learning. And so there are some places. As a longtime educator, I wonder if closing the Department of Education in a rush will really do a great job for our school systems. Or do you begin to really take apart the departments and really look at how feasible they are in the educational lane?
I'm fascinated because hearing the government talking about shutting down an agency is one thing, but hearing people who have to deal with this every day and care about education give reasoning why it's not working. So let me come back to you. I want to talk about your argument why the Department of Education needs to be shuttered and what would be put in its place. Do you send it back to the states? And does federal oversight help or hinder the quality of education in this country?
Well, we had quality education before the Department of Education existed.
Interesting.
The Department of Education didn't come into existence until the Carter administration, I believe it was 1979. And of course, I was in the 8th grade in 1979, and we took what was called the Iowa test. I don't know if you remember those or not. But we didn't learn to take the test. We learned, and then we took the test to see where we were in our assessment. And the states better know really what their states need, I think, in terms of education. Take Michigan, for example. It was an industrial state. It has an industrial build. There's cars. We need welders. We need electricians. The state knows exactly what it needs more than the government does. You can't really monitor a state from Washington, D.C. That's too broad. You got 50 states and you got Washington, D.C. trying to run every state, where each state can actually run its own Department of Education. It really, to me, it doesn't make sense to send money to Washington to send it back to the state.
Interesting. So let me go to Mr. Narcisse. So if the Department of Education, I'm not going to use the word eliminated, I'm going to say restructured. Because I think everybody agrees that it needs to be restructured.
Yes, it does.
Everybody's on the same page here. So how do we ensure, Mr. Narcisse, from your experience, that states can uphold better educational standards and the kids will actually learn?
Yeah, I think the question around whether, we're looking at more at the structure versus looking at what we actually can do. There has to be a standard, right? And that standard has to be clear. I think when you say, even if you push things down to the state, there has to be some standard. What's the standard of reading? We need to really be at this level. The question will be is, how do we monitor those things if we don't have an agency to help monitor that? And how do you keep that standard? So if a child moves from, Michigan to Florida, how we know they're reading at the same level, right? I mean, because jobs are jobs, and kids are working to be able to be in a job. And so I think we have to kind of think through those things. How do you make sure that children that are, funding for special education is happening at a particular level? I mean, even when the department was there are states that still had those challenges too. I'm not saying whether you should keep it open or closed. I think the question is, we're looking more at the structure and not necessarily the things that you have to actually resolve. And that, I think, is where we have to kind of focus on. So whether it's through funding, whether it's the needs of what kids need, or now we're about to go into a space of technology with AI. Well, how do we make sure that's a standard at every single state? So when these jobs come in, they put Meta or whatever groups of workforce pieces in certain parts of the country, kids have the skills to work there. I mean, this is kind of the question I think that a lot of people are asking. How are we going to measure that, whatever we decide to do? And I think that we got to really be clear about those standards across the United States.
Well, I think this is the question that I have not really thought about, was what was education before there was a Department of Education and how kids learn and their success versus the education attainment since the Department of Education?
Well, it was established about 150 years ago, and there have been some changes, and the one you referenced was Jimmy Carter's change, I think, in '79. And, but the Department of Education doesn't control all aspects of education. You have, you know, the curriculum.
Well, why was it needed in the first place? Can someone explain that?
Well, I could say what I believe they focus on right now.
It wasn't needed.
No.
Please address that.
Again, it wasn't in existence until 1979, and I do believe we as Americans were learning prior to 1979.
Better, it seems like.
So why do you need to establish one that far into our country's history? We had been in existence as a country, what?
Was he trying to leave? Was he trying to leave a legacy? Was he trying to just?
No.
So,
I think we've had problems with education for a long time. I mean, there was a Nation at Risk report that came out in the early 80s saying that we would be here right now if we didn't address these reading issues. The Department of Education, as I understand it, is to drive achievement amongst the states and to bring equity to students. It doesn't govern all aspects of education.
but you know what?
The states still do.
No matter what goes on in America, this is a fact. Connecticut and Massachusetts are always at the top and producing.
Well, may I add?
Yeah.
Massachusetts right now has only 40% proficient for their 8th graders in reading.
Really?
Yes, we're all at the bottom right now.
All at the
We are
bottom?
all at the bottom.
Yeah.
And that's why this is a national crisis. We need to have the Department of Education or someone say, let's treat this like a national crisis.
How do we,
and let's get reading to all of our kids.
We got to take a break because we got to ask, how did we get here? Your voice, your future town hall. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
You know, Mr. Narcisse is the former Baton Rouge superintendent, and so he brings with us a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge and insights, and things are not just so simple, cut and dry. So let me defer to him to elevate this conversation for us from your experience as a superintendent and involving so many different schools at one time.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's much more complex than how we're bringing it. I mean, right, you really need a holistic approach to help kind of support how kids do, how communities engage in schools, how families engage. And what's really challenging right now is there's an expectation for students to be at a particular level when you look at reading, and so states are trying to make sure, I'll use the example with the reading, because we've been talking about that with the science of reading. You know, states have to decide on what that level is, how do they help their teachers learn it, how do they help teachers be able to translate that to kids, how to help parents understand how to help them at home. It's just so many layers of the complexity. But the question is that you have to have some standard, right? And the problem that we have to figure out is no matter what structure we have in place for anything, you have to be clear and say, we want kids to be at this level. Where the pressure is for anybody that's in the K-12 system or even a community member or just a city is you have jobs, and those people that bring in jobs, they want people to have particular skill sets. And in most cities that you live in, the kids that grow up in those cities usually end up working in those cities. And if they don't have those jobs, those skill sets, what happens? People from other places come and they work there. And it's just that simple. And so, you know, I've worked in 9 school districts and a number of cities, both urban and suburban cities. And I can tell you it's the same problem no matter where you are. And I think the challenge right now is with all of the things that we have going on, you start to add technology, you start to add a different way that the society is moving faster in terms of how kids are learning or how things are interpreted in the world. And now the pressure is on in terms of the pressures that are happening in school. And it's just not one entity. I think, you know, you always hear, well, is it this person's fault, that person's fault? There has to be a much more meaningful way to coordinate that. Now, you could do that better, I believe, pushing it down towards the states, but you have to have a standard across for everybody. So no matter what state they go to, whether they go from California to Florida to wherever, you can at least say you have these sets of competencies, these sets of skill sets to do the work.
So Dr. Clark, you know, during the break, the discussion is just as robust as it is live. Ms. Good and Mr. Eason, when I made the comparison about Massachusetts and Connecticut, someone asked a very important question. Well, what are you comparing our educational success to the United States? And so, Dr. Clark, what should we compare our education success to? Obviously, from the conversation during the break, certainly not to the United States.
Well, it's funny, you know, Finland has had a great, their data has been amazing when it comes down to student performance. I think one of the things that could be a detriment when pushing things to the state is that each state has a different assessment, and their assessment goals are different. So when we measure our kids, it's not one measurement like other countries are doing. They have one measurement, so it's easy to have the data that really gives a finite picture of how their young people are doing, where we have pockets of data throughout the country and the states are driving it. One state is doing this assessment that says whether or not a student is meeting a mark, and another state is doing a different assessment that says that there's not an equal playing stick. And so it's important that we begin to level up and have that one measuring stick. And we can look at places like Finland that has that measurement that's solid across the country, that we can really look at the mastery of learning for every student in their country. And that's what needs to happen in order for us to really be able to say whether or not our students are performing to the level that we need them to.
So I'm going to stay with you a minute. Are we saying that technology, because you know the Hippocratic Oath of Medicine is first do no harm. Are we saying that technology has done more harm in the ability of a student's critical thinking and focus than it has to enhance it?
Absolutely, it has. And the old, you know, it's the old adage is that, you know, when you write something down, you utilize your ability to write, and you utilize your memory. You utilize your brain function to ingest that information, and you can regurgitate it because it has become your reality. And so the back to basics of which we saw in the 70s and 80s, where kids had to carry book bags and backpacks and use pencils, we moved away from that for some reason. Someone said that's not important. And so that information helped the mastery of learning with students because it became their reality in a repetitious manner.
That's a very good point. So with the rise, I'm going to go back to Mr. Narcisse on this. With the rise of AI, are we preparing students for the future? Are they just becoming too dependent on this technology?
Well, I mean, we're behind in terms of preparing kids for AI across the country. I mean, even your most best funded school is still behind. I mean, the question is, what are the type of skill sets that kids need now for the jobs of the future. I mean, you look at the World Economic Forum, I mean, the type of stuff that they're asking kids to do is totally different from how we measured a job in the past. And so I'll give you an example. I mean, you know, people are taking now iPads and putting it over empty space and determining how to build a house, right? That means a child has to have a totally different analytical way of thinking about that to do that particular job. And so I think we have to be in a place where we're embracing looking at how kids can use AI in a different way for these future jobs. I mean, the days of going back to what we were are gone. And if we don't start making that shift, we're going to fall further and further behind comparing to other countries that are way more advanced technology than in the current space we're in. And so I think like that's what we need to be focusing on, helping teachers to do different things and learning how to do it different ways. And also embracing ourselves to know that it's okay to start thinking differently on how to solve problems, not in the old generated way of doing things.
It's good. How do we resolve another critical issue here, the skills gap?
It is reading. I know that I keep saying that, but even with AI, it's reading. The kids can listen to videos right now, but they're getting only one voice, right? That when you can read, you can look at things from many different angles. You cannot even get a job in technology without reading. You have to read what's on the computer. So all of these jobs require reading, at least at an 8th grade level, and our kids are not getting that. We as a nation need to mandate that every child in K-12 education learns to read. We just co-authored and introduced a congressional resolution 163 a couple weeks ago, and we had Congressman Heisigman and Dingell and John James and Thanador and some others. We believe this is bipartisan. Everyone should jump on board. It's just saying every child in K-12 education should learn to read. And we know how to triage that. We know what it takes to get kids reading. And so we need to embrace that first and foremost. And in terms of AI, what I would say is what I find with reading. You know, reading's important, but relationship is also important. And when we're talking about educating our children with technology, we need to make sure that we're maintaining some relational aspects. And I'd like to also comment on something that someone said. You know, this ability, getting back to handwriting and cursive, is so important. It helps us to focus. It helps us to build a map in our mind, if you will, to hold ideas on and then be able to bounce other ideas off of. We're raising children that there's this knee-jerk reaction. You hear one thing and you align with it or you don't. And we need to get back to that analytical, and it is, the basis of it is reading. And that's where we need to start. And if we start today, 5 years from now, this will not even be a conversation.
What role, I know you want to add to this, but what about the role of teachers' unions? How can they better evolve to enhance this education process instead of obstructing it?
Well, I don't know so much that the teachers' union had the best interest in mind of the students. I mean, if the administration state grows by 87% in the classroom, teachers only grow by 7.6%, there's a huge imbalance right there. And so I don't know how the teachers' unions can do a better job. I do know how they can do a better job, is they got to reduce the administrative state. I think we need to put, if we're going to keep the Department of Education in place, we need to put some policies in place to reduce the size of the administrators as it relates to the number of students in the classroom. We need to focus on the students learning versus focusing on building an administrative state.
You wanted to comment on her discussion about reading.
Yeah, when we were in school, we called it 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, even though that's not an R, but that's what we did. Yeah. And that you're using at least 3 of your senses. If you read, you write, and you recite, you're using 3 of your major senses. And we look at technology, they call it, I think, social emotional learning. Yeah, technology definitely has its place, but it's a tool to help us, but it should not be the primary tool. Yes. We are human beings. We relate to each other when we sit in a space like this, and the emotional side of growing up as a human being is critical. Yeah, we need to keep up certainly with the world in these different areas, but we have to, I want to ask this question. When we look at education, Is it just so they can go to college, or are we educating them so they can take care of themselves? And I'm asking that question because we oftentimes leave vocational training out of the equation when every kid is not designed to go to higher education. And I mean, if you look at our country, I mean, years ago, I don't know what the number is today, we needed 250,000 welders to help repair bridges. And we talk about so are we training our children to be productive citizens in our society in every area and say every human being is important and every skill set is important, or are we just simply trying to educate them to go to higher education? If that's the case, I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves as a country and to our children.
This is Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Boy, what an insightful discussion with some very experienced and insightful people. So glad to be a part of this conversation, as well as I know you are. And we'll be back. We're not finished yet, okay?
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, Mr. Narcisse, if you could change the trajectory of education with all the issues that we discussed tonight, if there are things that you could put into place immediately and have the authority to do so, what would it be?
For me, it would be to move all schools towards creating workforce development pathways across the entire system. Now, whether you go to college, career, wherever you decide to go, but it should be much more workforce development that leads to economic gains for families and communities. I think what I have seen working in many districts, you know, and I've been every position you could think of, from schools all the way up to the superintendent, is once families can change their economic status, and that's through, you know, working in particular jobs, their whole livelihoods change. And so, you know, curriculums right now are not always workforce development. I know schools are trying to figure what that looks like, but make that connected to their city. That I think would be a game changer. And yes, you have to have the reading, you have to have the technology, you have to have all these other components, but really having curriculums that introduce not only introduce soft skills and hard skills, so they can really be in those places. And I think that would change the dynamic of our country pretty quickly.
Dr. Marco, Dr. Clark, if we continue on this trajectory and it doesn't change, what will America become?
America is doomed for failure if we don't change the trajectory of our young people. We're going to grow up without nurses and doctors and lawyers and more administrators, engineers. We will not be able to, this country will not survive. So it's important for us to save our educational systems, to ensure that our young people are learning and that they're mastering everything that they learn. And I will say this also, I believe we're going to have to step up and really hold our parents accountable for the job that they need to do in their preparation of sending their young people to school prepared and watching their guidance throughout their educational years.
You know, when we were in high school and college, it was mandatory we had to take a foreign language. Thank God for that. Should schools place more emphasis on foreign languages and these learning centers, and would bilingual education benefit all students? I mean, anybody?
Absolutely.
Yes, I believe so. I think students should learn multiple languages. It's important to make you well-rounded. It helps reading. It ensures that you have a linguistic way. Your oratory skills become better. And you have another way of articulating and a way to do research. So that itself will help you, because reading is the great equalizer. And once we get students to master that level at all course, then we'll be able to see a whole well-rounded student.
Now, Ms. Eason, let me mention this to you, because I did want to bring this up. Why is it that colleges and universities don't have programs to encourage men to pursue careers teaching in the classroom. It is a fact where you have a high concentration of men teaching in the classroom. They have less disciplinary problems. The kids learn and the respect is there. And it's not an indictment of women in the classroom. But how do we get more men to see that as a profession they want to pursue, that they can thrive in, and the benefits of the impact they can have, which would be profound on the lives of these students, are just immeasurable.
Well, I think the classroom or education on the whole was moved actually towards the feminine side. You've taken, a lot of times they don't even see a male teacher until they get into high school. And they've taken away a lot of the curriculum that men need, like going outside, gym. The men need to burn off this energy, and they'll say, well, they have ADD because they need them to sit still for a whole day. Well, that's not how males operate. Males and females are different, and they've taken away a lot of what men need in the classroom. And I want to bring this up when we say what is needed. I think we need to bring God back into the equation. Mm-hmm. You know, we used to be able to pray in school, and we actually can do it now. Some laws have passed that we can still pray in school. We need to bring back a God-centered education. I actually have in my backpack, that I meant to bring it out here on the floor, a curriculum from 1922 that was taught to high school students, 11th, 12th grade, about the New Testament. This was actually from the State Board of Education from Lansing, Michigan, and it says because there was such a demand for this. If we leave God out the equation, God is the one who created all things. And he created science, he created math, he created the world. And we are leaving him out the equation. If we're going to really get back to a nation that's going to be great, we have to put God back into our educational system.
So, and I agree, by the way, 100%. Ms. Good, with a growing teacher shortage, what incentives would actually attract and retain high-quality educators?
I believe you've got to give the teachers a situation where they can help kids. And right now, our kids are showing up needing everything. We know behavioral issues, and they're there for breakfast, they're there for lunch. Lots of issues, but also reading. The teachers cannot help the kids. And I've seen this in the social service area too, where you get people walking alongside children in foster care, and it's a broken system. In America, we are not taking care of our children in educating them in the very basics and also in basic needs. Two broken systems, social service and education, and we need to fix it. It is the work of this time for all of us, and it is fixable.
Mr. Narcisse, are we overemphasizing STEM at the cost of other essential skills like communication and ethics?
No, I don't think we're overemphasizing. I mean, those are all skill sets that should happen within STEM. And I think, I think there's not just a one or the other. I think there should be a set of competency and skills that kids should learn no matter what the subject is, what they're studying, to do things. They should do languages almost in every other spaces. I mean, we are in a place where we have to be competitive so we can do better economically. And I think that there's really importance in that approach. And so what I always get concerned in education is that we separate these things, and the reality is all of this connects in a way. And I also think it's important that we understand that the school cannot do it on their own. You have to figure out how you make sure families are a part of that, how you make sure community-based organizations are part of that, faith-based communities are part of that. And the question that what you have actually seen where communities are struggling more is a disenfranchisement of the community that plays a part on where that school is located and what actually happens in that school. And that's why you see more around school choice and more around how we talk about high quality education, those things. And I think we have to figure out ways to rebuild our neighborhoods and communities. And the only way to do that, and from my perspective, is to keep building schools where you're moving towards a much more workforce development approach where kids and families have more opportunities and skills to get higher wage jobs with higher demand and be able to do well in this country.
Years ago, years ago we coined a term, And the reason was, everybody keeps going after new and approved when it comes to education and curriculum. What's the new thing? And we run after it. But the term was, you will not get a STEM or STEAM without STREAM. The R is missing. And in our world, it's reading, and it's also relationship. And we find the gold star standard for reading proficiency. It's curriculum, but it is an assessment. You have to know where they need you to start. And it is one-on-one tutoring, which is totally relational. And so we need to put that R in there and then watch our kids just move forward in the direction of what they want to do. Right now, our nation is actually killing the futures of our children by not putting in that reading and that relationship piece.
You know, Dr. Clark, our traditional educational pathways, and I know Mr. Eason alluded to this, still the best route for teachers, or do we need new training models?
I think we need new training models. I think we need to open up some options that are there, but I think the backbone of teaching, it really has to be those individuals who really want to become teachers, who want to become educators, not the career changers. And I think over the past decade or so, we've had the career changers and folks that are looking to say, well, I'm going to give back, but rather they should be saying, I want to mentor up. Because giving back is a short way of saying that I'm doing this as a charity. And so instead of doing it as a charity, we need to look at it as something that's very cohesive. In the training model of really getting teachers in to do student teaching, which is very important, so they can get a hands-on training. And I think with anything, it's just like if you want to become a doctor, you have to do a residency. We need to add that residency back into the training module to ensure that the teachers are really signing up for what they think they're signing up for, and that they're there to actually do the work that's needed to help our educational systems advance.
You know, I cannot tell you the last time I've had such a highly just insightful, intelligent, game-changing conversation about education. It is the most important education. Everything starts with education. It's real self-esteem, real self-worth, creating wealth, what Mr. Narcisse talked about in terms of the workforce. If you don't have the skills, others will move in and take those jobs. I mean, all those things are so important. And also, college is not for everyone. You mentioned vocational schools. You know, I did the vocational thing, welding, carpentry, and that I still put to good use today. So I cannot thank you guys for still loving education, loving these kids, understanding the importance of it, because you guys are really the true heroes and sheroes of this nation. And I cannot celebrate and thank you enough for what you're doing. We're going to do this again. Thank you so much for joining us. And Aaron, thank you for booking this show. I gave you a hard time, but it was a great show. God bless you, everyone. Good night.